Morning, or after. No, still morning. So I'm going to be walking around because I am freezing. These new shirts aren't that warm. Um, the value of what I'm here to talk today is predominantly around well architected. It fits in quite nicely with what Lee was talking about. So the origins of where this chat came from was I was reading a white paper. And as I was reading through this white paper, there was a quote in it around only being as strong as the weakest link. And it struck a chord with me because my dad used to use it quite a lot, and usually completely incorrectly, and usually in the wrong places too. So it really did confuse me. So I actually went and, being a bit of a geek, looked this up. This was first used in 1785, so nearly as old as my dad. And by a guy called Thomas Reid, who actually used it as part of an essay around intellectual property. But where this kind of fits into is when you the white paper I was actually reading was fitting into how this dynamic around growth and how important we scale and why is that relevant to you. So as you guys start to build applications, start to look at ways to actually create new applications, whether that's for yourselves within your own organization or as part of a company to actually drive adoption, drive users to using that application, driving the users to actually start using it. Fundamentally, all of it is around making growth and trying to grow the way that your application is used. You want it to be popular, you want it to be the next Netflix, you want people to adopt it. With adoption, obviously, you need an architecture. And when you first start out, you have an architecture that you know and you love, and it's the concept of the pet. Right? You know every inch of it, you know what every part of that server does, you know what every piece of the code is, you know where every part of it fits in, and you know how it all stitches together. However, we all know that there's a change, right, and the cloud's coming. And from personal experience, when you build an architecture and you start to test, or you start to make changes to that architecture, there are always cases where things happen that you don't know. And I know from my own experience, I used to work for a very large educational department. We had 1.5 million users on the network at any one time. We were rolling out a brand new application. So we did all of the testing. We built a completely separate test environment for it. We bled off production traffic. We put production traffic through it. We listened to every weird use case there was in every scenario that we could thought and laughed at. And we were completely overconfident in the fact that when we rolled this change out, it would work and it would be easy. So as you do, you get up at whatever it is, silly o'clock in the morning, you go, you roll out that change. We were all patting each other on the back about how quickly we'd rolled this change out. We went through all the testing, we ran through the testing scripts. Everything was actually, that's better. Everything was going well. We all patting each other on the back. We're all heading for our nice warm beds. And then one of my colleagues actually says, "Oh, I'm just going to test it from my house." I'm like, okay. And literally as we're walking out the door, he says, "It's not working," which we all kind of went, "He's doing something wrong." So then we start picking some random locations, we start doing some testing, and sure enough, it didn't work. So then now there's panic throughout the whole change team because it worked in test, which is the classic element that we all recite. After much panicked troubleshooting, we actually tied it down to the fact that it was one specific character and it's one specific pop, which you could never actually get in a test scenario. And I suppose what that's actually leading to is the fact that architectures are now becoming more and more complex. You're getting to understand less and less of them. So Lee touched on it. As we start to move towards the integration of developers with operational staff and that whole DevOps community, as more and more infrastructure is being built as code, it's repeatable. It's being built as a coded script to be deployed. It means that you don't get to know it. And this is why they call the classic cattle scenario. So you don't know them, you don't cherish them, you just turn them over and start again. And then add on top of that the fact that you then have 90 plus services that Amazon currently have offering that you want to integrate because they're all super funky and they offer a massive customer advantage to you, and they provide benefits to your customers in using these services and integrating them and simplifying your life. But that's another set of large-scale services that you have to then integrate and understand. And that means complexity again. And so one of the things, this is the actual article I was reading, which is the Chaos Monkey. And Chaos Monkey is actually a script that is available. It was created by Netflix, so it's on Netflix's GitHub. And they use Chaos Monkey to actually test their engineers in production and create failures. So Chaos Monkey is actually run in production through their autoscale groups to actually go off and start turning stuff off and see what happens. So they are actually in production testing for failure and testing to make sure that they can survive that failure. Now this has actually also been scaled. They have a thing called the Symbian Army now. And the Symbian Army has a whole bunch of other scripts that actually automates the process of going around and creating havoc throughout their network. In their production network too, not test, this is on their production network. Including, which is now my new favorite, which is Chaos Gorilla. And Chaos Gorilla turns off a whole AZ. So imagine losing effectively a whole data center in production and confidently knowing that it will fail over and pick up all your user traffic at that sort of scale. That's quite a confident place to be. And being able to have that level of confidence in your infrastructure is obviously a place we'd all like to be in. Now, one of the things that obviously we can do to get there is a process called well-architected. So the well-architected process is something that Amazon Web Services put together over a period of time working with its customers. And what happened over that period of time is we got to understand the classic questions. So what are the best practices? How do I do this? How do I migrate this? How do I complete the standards? How do I make sure that I'm doing the right thing? Right? And there's all the things that we always need to do as architects is to make sure that we understand those best practices and implement them. And so AWS put together the well-architected framework. And so the AWS framework is actually a framework that you can engage through your account team and your solution architects. So your solution architects are happy to run this. And this is and kind of to Lee's point, is part of that change in the culture and part of that adoption of that culture, because it's a joint process that we undertake with you. It's a shared process. We help go through it. Once you engage them, it's a commitment. So you commit to actually doing it and commit to getting the right resources to it. And it fundamentally fits around some of the key areas. So it's built from using pillars. Those pillars have defined design principles within each of those pillars. And then there are a set of questions that you answer. So those questions actually go to filling in a chart which works around the red, yellow, green, and actually looking towards creating a report, and that report being hopefully all green, that you have a well-architected framework. So it's also around making informed decisions, and AWS is a great organization that is data-driven. We love to have facts and figures around all of our decisions, whether it goes against what the decisions should actually be, but we love the data. And so, being able to have and use an organization such as New Relic to gather data to help standardize, and we talked about baselining and creating that key element where we can actually have data and baseline data to actually make informed decisions is obviously important in being able to stitch the decisions and understanding what architectures are doing, how to make them better, and how to improve them within the pillars. So we talked about this a little bit. So this is fundamentally the 5 pillars. So security is always a primary concern with the cloud. So AWS focus heavily on security, and we have, again, created a model around the shared security model. So the shared security model is obviously AWS saying that we secure the cloud, and then share that responsibility of securing applications on the cloud. And so it's a very defined process about where we will secure up to, what parts, and then what parts you need to take to actually help implement and secure those applications. We then have the reliability, and all of these pillars have questions underneath them that you go through and answer to actually fill out, to understand and give you a broader concept around what each pillar does. So with reliability, obviously, we're looking at potentially using tools like Chaos Monkey to actually test, have you got auto-scaling, have you got anything that is the ability to recover the infrastructure, how are you doing failover, is that globally available, looking at all of those elements to make sure that there is reliability built into your application. Then you come into the performance monitoring, which kind of goes again to the point around how we can get that browser thing going, to coin the phrase. And looking at ways to actually knowing and understanding, is your application performing correctly? Is it being timely for users? Is it getting the reaction that they want? Is it getting the performance that they need? And then, of course, there's cost optimization. Now, AWS has some cost optimizer tools that are built in, but there are also other mechanisms that you can use and third-party elements to actually look at ways to making sure that what you're running is what you need to run, and that it's running at a very cost-effective way, and that it's actually you're not overly using resources. So leveraging either reserved instances or lower cost storage to actually look at ways to reduce those costs. And then, of course, there's operational excellence. And I think operational excellence is now is a new pillar that was added in November of last year. And it kind of is a real nod to the fact that all of these things don't really mean a lot unless you can repeat them in an operationally controllable manner. So it's great someone running off and building the world's best application, but if you can't deploy it and manage it and run it in a sensible way and repeatable way, then it just becomes uncontrollable. And so operational excellence is a great way to be able to look at how you can take your application and look at it and make it into a, particularly leveraging infrastructure as code, a repeatable piece of architecture that can be reused. And another thing that well-architected allows for, which touches on Lee's point around the whole dynamic infrastructure, is that it allows for incremental change. So with operational excellence and leveraging these peers, you can actually, and the power of the cloud, you can replicate your production environment, you can bleed off production traffic to it, you can test, and then once you're happy with it, and managed in that whole environment, leveraging Elastic Beanstalk, for example, and once you have that, you can make an incremental change. That may be a code upgrade, it may be adding in a new piece of security software, it could be changing a fundamental front end, but you can make these incremental changes. Once you're happy with it, you cut over your user base, and then you completely kill your old environment. So your environment it shouldn't be static. It's going to be now more and more flexible and allow you to make more and more changes. And those changes don't then have to be these big release runs. You can actually focus on actually just doing small pieces of changes as you want and when you're ready. Oops. So we've talked about some of the benefits. Obviously, there's a few others that you should think of. Things such as, with performance, there's then like can you leverage CloudFront? Can you leverage a CDN? Can you leverage some of that front end for security? Can you look at ways of making it more reliable? What tools are you using? Are you using an automated process to test it? Is it manual testing? How do you meet and greet all of those requirements? What are the checkpoints? Do you have defined checkpoints? And so, that's weird, it's different down here. I was worried then. So then there's an engagement process. So the engagement process runs through in that Once you approach your account team, your AWS account team, or your solution architect, if you have a direct relationship with them, and ask them that you want to undertake a well-architected review, the first thing to do is actually identify a workload. So a workload for us it doesn't have to be just a singular application. It can be a complete business critical element that ties lots of different applications together, or it can be a singular element, it could be a test load, but it's something that is clearly defined as a singular point. And once you've defined that, you get the right sponsorship, and then you actually get handed the set of questions to run through. And that engagement process, then you then run through, answer all the questions. It's highly likely that you'll get quite a lot of red, so don't worry. That's what the whole point is to highlight those. You then work with your solution architect to actually move those and identify what those is causing those red elements and move them into green. And as you move through those areas and improve it, what the outcome is to actually create a final report. And that report then goes back to having data. So that report gives you a data point to actually then look at what you have created. So you've got a standardized report around that application. You know that it's met the best practices. You know that it's has defined your application. And you can use that also then in discussions with AWS, our professional services, with other partners, or even to actually help lookers in creating standards within the business. So it can be used as a really important way to actually baseline and then use data interspersed with that you've gathered from New Relic to baseline other performance metrics and create an overall view of what you're doing with your architectures as you move to the cloud. And finally, just to say that, to close that loop, once you've done this and you provide and you meet all of those requirements, you then don't have a weakest link. You then have actually closed the chain. You've got an application that you're confident in, you have a repeatable piece of infrastructure that you know you can use and deploy, you have the confidence within it to make incremental changes, and you have a dynamic infrastructure that you are confident in. The other thing around this is to then create a pipeline. So once you start doing this, you get more confidence, you start to repeat it, you identify more workloads, and you actually then obviously can start a pipeline of creating more and more of these well-architected reviews. So in closing, if you have any questions, please come and find us at the booth. There's myself and Kirsten there, and I'm happy to talk to you. And I appreciate your time, and thank you very much.